Yeah, I know. For the video where I'm going to be in blue tones the whole time, I should wear the least blue shirt possible, so it really makes the scene look real weird. Anyway, hi, welcome to the latest R-rated review. Today I'm going to be talking about episode 4 of Loki, the Nexus event. I just recently, I think a day and a half ago, did episode 3 because I was gone that week, and I'm happy to say that this episode is significantly better than the previous one, Lamentis. Lots to talk about here. There's a lot of big... This appears to be the episode where most of the big twisty twists happen. So if you haven't seen the episode yet, the short version with no spoilers that I can give you is basically the acting is really good. The twists are really interesting. Some of this stuff definitely came out of left field. There are some super unexpected moments, and I like this episode a lot. Go watch the episode if you haven't yet. So, to actually get into the episode, again, I have a couple different angles I want to approach this from, and we can kind of break it down bit by bit. One of the big things from the previous episode that sort of bothered me was the chemistry-ish thing they were trying to build between Loki and Sylvie continue into this episode. It's still kind of unsettling and a little gross because it is literally two different versions of Loki that seem to be slowly falling in love with each other. It feels like it's a metaphor for Loki's narcissism, and then the episode goes and kind of directly states that twice. So I guess that's kind of what they're going for there, which, I get it. It kind of works. It is still sort of gross, sort of weird. I'm not sure how I like it. And I've got a fan on. It was keeping me cool, but it was blowing directly into the microphone, so that isn't going to be good. Time to start sweating. So the episode brings up Loki and Sylvie essentially being some form of narcissism that is happening there. It still makes me feel really weird. Loki is written very painfully smitten at various points, and it's very confusing, and I really don't know how I feel about it other than, not great. I'm trying to keep the mic off my shoulder. I can't seem to get it to want to behave today, so I'm going to do the best I can with it. Mobius calls it out at one point. We rejoin with Mobius, and he calls out that it's, such clear narcissism, and yeah, that's kind of what it is. Loki and Sylvie basically are ready to stare down the apocalypse of Lamentis and its moon when they share kind of this little moment, and the moment creates a Nexus event that sets off a branch that is nearly vertical. It's an extreme deviation from the sacred timeline, which at first makes you think so in that moment, would they have figured something out that would have dramatically altered the timeline? Or is there something else going on? And it's going to be my chief prediction that I'm going to get into at the end of this video. But it was very odd because they didn't seem to be doing much of anything that was going to avert the apocalypse on Lamentis and Lamentis 1. But there's also they're still doing too much continuity explanation and exposition. They're doing too much exposition still, not to the same degree, but they're doing a lot of tell don't show, except they're also showing it. They would show a thing and then they tell it. For example, the very beginning of the episode, we actually get to see Sylvie's childhood, presumably back when she was just Loki. She is 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. She's pretty young when she gets captured by the Minutemen, who are led by Judge Renslayer, back when she was a hunter herself. They set a reset charge, they wipe out that timeline, and Loki is processed the same way, our more familiar Loki was at the start of the season, in the jumpsuit and the metal detector and all that stuff. The metal detector is something that I find very interesting from this episode as well. But we get to see a little bit of that, and then a few minutes later, Sylvie walks through and verbalizes all of that to Loki again. She says, when I was a child, they came and took me, and they processed me and they wiped out my reality, and then I took away a TEM pad, and I've been on the run ever since, which we saw all of that. And then again, a few minutes later, Loki's trying to kind of give Sylvie a bit of like a boost at the end of it all, right before they expect they're going to die. And he also, again, reiterates like, but you are just one person that they tried to destroy, the people who control time, and you ran rings around them, and you almost took them down just by yourself. Like, we know this. And like, there's little bits and pieces of like, okay, he's trying to, give her a little something positive at the end, and he's kind of gushing a little bit, and it's like, okay, that's neat and all, but it's like, let's get to it. This series, as time goes on, weirdly enough, is feeling small in scope, like unexpectedly small in scope, which is weird because we've got WandaVision, which is by design small in scope, and yet they did a lot with it. It was very imaginative. They did a lot of really interesting stuff with that. You have Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which was not small in scope. It was pretty large in scope, and outside of the middle segment of it, felt really broad as well. The very middle of it, they were kind of reusing the same sets a lot, so it did start to feel very samey after a while. But here we've got 2 episodes back to back. The first one takes place entirely in a set of like small areas in an apocalypse. This one takes place almost entirely in like a set of 4 or 5 rooms at the TVA. And it is making me a little bit antsy, and like I want to see more of what's going on here. Also, speaking of like continuity from a minute ago, the timeline being bombed seems to have just been dropped as a plot line. Like, the timeline seems to have recovered very, very fast. So I guess in the 12 hours that they spent on Lamentis, the TVA fixed all of those timeline issues. There were like 25 at least Nexus events, and they cleared them all that fast. Like, okay, all right. At one point, Mobius swipes a TEM pad and puts it in his jacket pocket, and then walks down the hall and pulls it out of his pants. And I'm like, oh, well, that's not where you put that, but okay, man. We are getting into... So there are some revelations about the TVA. In the previous episode, there was the reveal that every one of the TVA are variants themselves, who were essentially stolen from their timelines and had their memories erased. And we get to see some more of that in this episode. We get to see actual footage of an interrogation of Hunter C-20 after she and everyone else returned from Haven Hills, the Rocks Cart location. And I was kind of wondering, like, all right, I don't think it's a bluff on Sylvie's part, but it could have been. Also, I guess prediction from the last episode that one of the two enchanted the other appears to have been bunk. It was exactly how it looked, and the editing just was there to hide more cuts, I guess. But like I said then, too, it would have felt like it was cheapening the episode a little bit if they just kind of went, oh, yeah, that didn't happen. That big spectacle, don't worry about it. So there's a lot of very culty vibes in this episode. You get a strong sense of, like, you know, the underpinnings of a society and an organization that thrive on secrecy amongst its members. You could see it as being kind of analogous to S.H.I.E.L.D., especially while it was while Hydra was kind of calling the shots from within S.H.I.E.L.D. There's sort of this, you know, clearance levels and, you know, secret files and databases and need to know basis and you can't see so-and-so without me kind of thing. And I think that's kind of interesting based on the way that some things go in the end. I think that's going to build to something very strange. I love, there was a conversation that happens between Mobius and Renslayer that I think is really cool. If you can go anywhere, anytime on the timeline, where would you go? And he quickly kind of shoots back, is like, well, I can, which is accurate, but also highlights kind of, and she and Renslayer is like, no, but seriously though. And I think that highlights a really good difference between these characters where Mobius, both A, is not hiding very well that he has issues with what's going on, but also that he's been so trained to just be an agent of the TVA that he doesn't even think about the fact that, you know, like, he doesn't think of it beyond the job. He doesn't think of it any further than, oh, but I can go anywhere in any time, and that's just how that goes. And then you got Renslayer, who's a little bit more casual, I guess. Like, she's trying to sort of keep this casual vibe going. Like, the more that Mobius tries to dig into stuff, the more she tries to, like, kind of distract him with just kind of random dialogue and all of that to keep him, you know, thinking about them as friends. She really doubles down on that we're friends, we're allies, we've been tight for so long. And I have to imagine that, like, maybe there's a chance that Mobius and Renslayer in their former, in the actual timeline, that, you know, not the sacred, like, not their variant timelines, but in their normal timelines, if they knew each other, and, like, it'd be really wild to me if the two of them actually normally are meant to end up together, but they've, like, their variant things that they decided not to or didn't or something, and that's why there's this kind of, like, not lost, I don't know, there's a certain kind of vibe, especially coming from Mobius towards Renslayer, that's really hard to pin down. But he speaks to her like someone who either is in a relationship or is in love or something. There's a you know, a familiarity to it, like a friendship to it also, but, like, there's a bit more depth to it there that's kind of right under the surface. At the very least, I'm wondering if the two of them knew each other in their normal timelines, but I think I have to get into actual spoilers of this episode at this point. I know that I've barely talked about this one, but the stuff I really want to dig into is all focused on spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, this would be your time to definitely bail on this episode and go watch it and then come back. And, you know, welcome back if you did pause and go do that. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Oh, man. So obviously Mobius and Loki are not thrilled with each other after how things went on Lamentis, and I guess I should talk about the time loop real quick. There's a time cell which locks its prisoners into a very tight time loop of a bad memory. Not necessarily their worst memory. I'm sure there were worse for Loki, but apparently he once, as a prank, cut off a big chunk of Lady Sif's hair. Also, Lady Sif is here. That was awesome. Wasn't expecting that at all. Great cameo. And she gets pissed. She slaps him, knees him in the balls, punches him out, and then it just loops that. So he's getting the shit kicked out of him for a long time. We don't really know quite exactly how long. Not a hugely long time, but, like, I don't know, an hour maybe. But as Loki's being thrown in there, he tells Mobius that, you know, the TVA is lying to him. And this kind of sprinkles a little seed of doubt in Mobius, because he's already feeling a little weird about what's happening to C20, because C20 is apparently dead. And he's been told not to tell anybody about it, which is a little bit weird. And so Loki dropping this gets him thinking about it. He starts asking Renslayer some questions, and she gets dodgy about it. He talks with B-15, who's also feeling shaky about stuff. After being enchanted by Sylvie. So, like, both Mobius and B-15 are, like, on shaky footing all of a sudden. Like, they've had their loyalties to the TVA tested, and now they're not really sure how they feel. But, God, the most fucking heartbreaking thing, we have this great moment where, so Mobius has thrown Loki back into the time cell, and then jumps in there and is like, you can be whatever you want to be, even good. And Loki's just kind of like, okay. And he's like, you know, just in case someone ever told you differently. Because, like, right before he threw him in the time cell the second time, he basically told him, was like, all right, I guess we're done here. I'm going to throw you in your time cell, and then we're going to kill you, essentially. So, like, and just sort of doubling down on the idea that he's a variant, so he's not worth anything, that sort of deal. It's kind of a sweet moment, and they sort of smile at each other, and they run out because they're ready for their plan, and then they get captured. And while they're standing there having this kind of face-off, and Mobius briefly tries to pretend like nothing's wrong. He's like, oh yeah, your temp pad, I grabbed the wrong one, because he took Renslayer's temp pad when she wasn't paying attention and swapped it out for his, at which point he watches a video of Renslayer interrogating C20 after Haven Hills, presumably right before she was pruned. So as they're standing there, Mobius is just kind of like, you know where I'd go if I could go anywhere, anytime? I go back to my old life before the TVA, the real life that I had, and I would go and ride my jet ski, and it'd be great, and I just want to go back to what it was before all of this, like the life that you took away from me kind of thing. Like, he doesn't remember it, but I think he knows enough to know that that's why the jet skis mattered to him, which was like, that makes so much sense that he's got this fascination with jet skis. So he was presumably taken from the 90s somewhere. But as he's doing this thing, one of the Minutemen kind of gets their like baton ready, and like there's like this jump in Mobius's voice. Like he kind of like does one of these, and he starts speaking faster, and he's like hyperventilating, and just boom, pruned right there in front of Loki. And one, so abrupt, and I love it. I need to talk more about what I expect this stuff means, but so I've always got little imagined things I would love to do if I ever were to develop a video game of my own, for example. And one of the things that I wanted to do, partly for shock value, partly to really drive home the wickedness of a villain character, would be to have them just off a, side character, not a side character, but like one of your allies, very abruptly. No warning, no explanation, just kind of in the middle of their character arc and story, just boom, they're dead. And to do two things. One, to show just how fucked up and evil this villain is, but also to really, stick a dagger in. There's kind of this thing with a lot of video games where every character gets to play out a full arc, and nobody dies until they complete some semblance of an arc, so they can have their realization right before they go. But it's like, aside from that not being very realistic, it also is like, maybe there's something interesting about what happens if someone is taken very abruptly and suddenly before they have a chance to, make amends or get their affairs in order kind of thing. And that's what this felt like. It was like, all right, here we go. Mobius and Loki, let's do it. Oh, Mobius is dead. And it's in the middle of him giving this very terrified. Owen Wilson acted the fuck out of this scene and the one before it. From the point where he's like, honestly, the whole episode he's doing great, but from the point that he goes to grab Loki to the point where he gets pruned, A+ acting, really good shit. You can hear the fear in his voice as he's defiantly telling Renslayer that he knows that he had a life before the TVA stole him. So yeah, that was really good. That was really, really, really good. And speaking of acting, I got to look this up right now. I meant to do it before. Let's see if I can find this really fast before I wait too long. I'm going to mispronounce her name. Wunmi Mosaku, who plays B-15. Might be the breakout star of this episode. I think she did a phenomenal job. She seemed shaken for the entire episode, having dealt with being enchanted by Sylvie. And you find out the reason she's so shaken, and the reason she was even in Roxcart, was less like, oh, she got in my head, and more, I saw something. She saw memories from her old life, the same way C20 did about the margarita bars. And it's really messing with B-15 to the point where she goes and grabs Sylvie. And I didn't even mention how they got back. The Nexus spike that happens signals to the TVA. They go arrest them. They separate them. I guess it's not that interesting of a thing right there exactly. But she goes to Sylvie and makes her come back to Roxcart with her so they can have a conversation that's essentially invisible to the TVA. And she asks, she tries to get her to, it's like, was that a trick? Was that an illusion? Was that, she's like, no, I can't create memories. Those are yours. Those are from your life. And she wants proof, so she wants to see more, so she does, and like B-15's like, I looked happy. What now? Like, so B-15, just like that, is like, she's on board for whatever Sylvie is planning next. So Loki, Mobius, briefly, Sylvie, and B-15 are all on one team here. Renslayer grabs Loki, goes and grabs Sylvie, notices the wet hair. I think that's actually a really great detail they worked in, the fact that Rockstar was destroyed by, I think it was a category like 8 or 9 storm. Her wet hair obviously sets off to Renslayer that something's up, and one of the other Minutemen rats out B-15. So they're like, find B-15. She's been compromised as well. And so Renslayer brings Loki and Sylvie up to see the Timekeepers. We actually see them briefly at the very start of the episode. All we see are shadowy figures in a blue room. Looks very cold. They have big glowy eyes. We see that again. It's golden glowy eyes. And the room has this neat like Escher aesthetic to it. If you don't know MC Escher, he is most probably well known for, there's a very specific piece of art that is like stairs moving in multiple directions and dimensions on top of each other. So stairs that are running up this way, stairs that are running sideways, upside down, things like that. And the probably most obvious use of it in pop culture would be from Labyrinth with David Bowie. The entire castle, Jareth's castle, is basically a big Escher painting. Pretty well realized, all things considered. They do a really good job with that. I want to say there's another popular one that also does it, and I cannot remember it because I distinctly remember there being a point where it's like one character sees that that someone else is on a bridge down there, but they keep trying to find each other and they can't connect. I want to say Digimon. Weirdly enough, I think Digimon did an Escher building like that, non-Euclidean geometry and all. So this one doesn't seem to have any actual physicsy weirdness to it. It's just design-wise very Escher. It's a cool look though. I do like that. I was expecting, honestly, that we were going to get the end of the episode as they got to the elevator or as they got to the top, as the door opened, something, but we actually get a full scene here. I was not expecting that. And I was kind of... So there's a conversation that happens in the elevator where Sylvie asks Renslayer, one, do you remember me? And she's like, yep. It's like, what was the Nexus event that made you destroy my timeline? And while they were doing this, I was kind of assuming that it was literally going to be the fact that you were born, because she is literally a different gendered Loki. But even Sylvie kind of suggests that it was more that it was a steady separation over time that triggered that. So like maybe the idea is they keep an eye on branches, but if they don't seem to be actually moving towards Redline, which I assume is going to be the title of either episode 5 or 6, probably episode 6. Actually, no, it'll probably be episode 5, and then 6 will probably be like... I don't know what 6 is going to be. But yeah, so I was expecting that to be the thing that was like, oh, you know, what the thing that was wrong was that you were ever born or something. Instead, Renslayer's like, I don't remember. And Sylvie, who previous to this was like, it must have been important, it's led to all of this. And Renslayer's like, nah. And it's just so fucking cold. And it's so weird. Like, and it's... There's a part, again, there's like a culty vibe to this whole episode. We get to see the past with young Loki, Sylvie, and Renslayer as a hunter. And Sylvie gets brought before the court that Loki did at the start of the show. And it's got a different judge because Renslayer's not a judge at this time. But we don't know who that guy is. We don't know who this judge is. We never see him again. And Renslayer eventually becomes that judge. And it's like, so what happened to that guy? Is it a thing where anytime someone starts asking too many questions, they get offed? And maybe the judge started to figure something was up? I don't know. it could even literally be that by that Loki variant getting away, that Judge got offed and was replaced with Renslayer. I don't know. But Renslayer is kind of the dragon, as they say, like a very loyal, subservient character to the Timekeepers. And there comes a point where she is about to be on the receiving end of one of those death sticks, and she suddenly like loses not her composure, but that steely coldness kind of evaporates a little bit, and she suddenly looks very sad and just says, "Do it." And that's another thing that goes with cults, is like there's clearly some form of like mental and emotional psychological abuse that is part of being this whole system, I guess. And this episode has so much death. So we had C20, we had Mobius, we had gets fucking offed. I was gonna segue into this more naturally, but I was so ready to jump to the end. There's a point where they knock out, they fight against a bunch of Minutemen because they confront Loki and Sylvie, brought, with their time callers to the Timekeepers, and they the Timekeepers are really hard to understand, for what it's worth. There's so much reverb on their voices that I had to throw on subtitles for a couple of their lines just to understand what they were saying, so that was kind of weird. But they essentially are like defiant to the end kind of thing, like, what, you just brought us here to kill us? What the hell? Who cares? Just do it, get it over with. I've died so many times. And B-15 suddenly shows up with another one of the little time caller spinner things to like interrupt Renslayer controlling Sylvie, throws Sylvie's sword to her, and a battle ensues. B-15 gets knocked out pretty quick, weirdly enough. Loki takes out a couple of the guards. Sylvie takes out Renslayer, and then she hucks a sword at... So the Timekeepers are like, "You were a child of the Timekeepers, Sylvie. Let's talk." And it's like, that's weirdly desperate there. But she throws her sword and beheads one of the Timekeepers, revealing that the Timekeepers are robots. The Timekeepers are dead. / they never existed. So that's interesting. And while Loki and Sylvie are just standing there going like, okay, now what? This was unexpected. And then again, over explaining their emotional state, they're like, "We came all this way to find the Timekeepers, but they're an android." And she's like, "I wasn't expecting this. Erg." And it's just like, yeah, we get that. I don't think we needed that to be explained. Loki is about to make a declaration of love, it seems, to Sylvie, both A, because he's just kind of all like, "Whoa, we almost died," and also like to try to like build her back up for a second because they're both so like shaken by this whole thing. And then Renslayer gets him in the back with a death stick, and we watch him fucking disintegrate. So yeah, he's gone. That was abrupt. They did this really clever thing. We tripped a breaker, so I'm trying to remember exactly where we were here, and the camera keeps turning off because it's so hot. They did this really clever and sneaky thing where he puts his arms on her shoulders. He puts his arms on Sylvie's shoulders because we're supposed to be getting the impression that he's gonna he's making this grand declaration of love and he's gonna go in for the big kiss kind of thing. And right at that moment is when it goes down. You're like, oh, that was a fucking good bait and switch. Dug that. And then the episode pretty much more or less ends like Sylvie very quickly disarms Renslayer, and again, the moment where she just says, "Do it," and she's like, "No, you're going to answer all of my questions." And then we cut out. So, yeah. That was an interesting way for things to go down in the end. I'd mentioned the actor for B-15 did an incredible job. I'm also noticing that we're seeing more and more of her face and her head in general as time goes on. As she's becoming a more fleshed out, real person character, she's becoming less of a kind of cog here. She's losing she doesn't have the helmet on or the visor or any of that stuff. So she's in this episode, I don't think she's got headgear on at all. So that was a cool progression over time. There are some issues that I've got with the general action and choreography and post-production and things. there's some good stuff too. I mentioned like the nice Escherization of the Timekeeper's chamber. At the beginning when they're on Lamentus and they're having the final moments there's a lot of really good like blurry background things going on between a lot of like little little like meteor chunks of Lamentus that are falling onto the moon, which is pretty cool. Then we've got really awkward CGI and hard to understand lines out of the Timekeepers, and I think that might have been intentional. Like they sound and look a little bit on the fake side, and they also seem to be 3 different races too. Like they're designed to look. The center one is designed to look vaguely human. The one on camera left is designed to look kind of aquatic. Like it's got like a mustachy kind of thing. Like it looks a little like Davy Jones, but without the squiddiness, like without the tentacliness, I guess. And then the third one looks very Titan-like, as in like from the comics. So that was kind of an interesting thing there. I mentioned the last episode felt kind of Doctor Who-y. When you go in and you see the silhouettes of the Timekeepers, I turned to Sarah, I'm like, they look like the fucking Time Lords. They look like Rassilon and his crew on Gallifrey, because they have these big, like neck flare, like collar things going on, and they look exactly like the Time Lord outfits. I guess the Time Lord ones also have a bit that goes like up over their head, but like it's got a very like hot thing going on there, which I'm like, okay, cool, I guess. The fight scene between Loki and Sylvie and the Minutemen is a little bit clunky. It reminds me of the not great choreography out of the Praetorian Guard scene from The Last Jedi. It feels very, all right, you do a move and then everyone, we have our weapons tight, so we kind of sit here for a second, whoa, and then we go and do a different thing, and like the thing going on in the background is a lot less, is more just like, I'm just doing stuff. Like it was a little weak. Also, all of these people sure are whipping their death sticks around pretty willy-nilly and doing all these like flippy weird moves for people who, if it brushes against them, will erase them from existence, right? That seemed a little bit strange. We had some cool references and things. I mentioned Lady Sif shows up for a great cameo. I thought that was kind of cool. It was a little unclear whether there was an added implication that Loki and Sif had sex, but I'm not positive on that one. Unclear. They didn't dip into it hard enough to feel conclusive there, and considering they have been a bit more explicit about stuff like that in other episodes of the series, I'd be willing to believe that isn't what happened, but hard to say. There was also Mobius at one point tells B-15 that he's surprised that they're having so much trouble with the Lokis because they've brought in Kree, Titans, which is Thanos' race, and vampires. And I think this is the first mention of vampires in the MCU, as a nice little nod ahead to Blade when that comes around down the line. So that's pretty rad. Also, potentially, probably less so, but maybe a tip of the hand to Morbius as well, but probably not. I think the Spider-Man-less Spider-Man universe Sony is doing is going to be kind of a one-way canon situation. I don't think that stuff's going to fold back up the chain into the MCU. So all of these things are great, and then as the credits roll, we get a stinger where Loki wakes up in a very gray environment and wonders if he's dead. And he's told by a very familiar voice that he's not, but he will be soon if he doesn't go with them. And the them you see are a bunch of other much more extreme variants of Loki, including the very familiar voice of Richard E. Grant as the original Marvel Comics version of Loki. Like, very loud green and yellow outfit. He's got a fucking laptop bag as a satchel. He's got his yellow cape, and he's got the little headband with the horns and all of that. And literally, so the very first Avengers comic dealt with the formation of the Avengers to fight Loki. It was the inspiration for the Avengers movie, as well as the overall like MCU beginnings in Phase 1. So we've got Richard E. Grant as this older comics original version of Loki. I am so excited. And it looks like they're in New York. Looks like they might be in 2012 New York. And in the background on the right, you can very clearly see a completely destroyed Avengers Tower. So I'm very curious what's going to happen here. I'm wondering if one of these variants or another variant will turn out to be a Loki that succeeded in taking over New York, and this is this is like that New York or something. I have no idea what's going on, but I love the fact. I hope that episode 5 is titled Into the Loki Verse. Fuck it, why not? You wanted Spider-Man, Spider-Verse live action? Screw you, we're getting Loki-verse live action. I'm so fucking excited about that. That was a great twist at the end of that. Like, oh, we're getting much more than 2 variants in all of this. So that's cool. We got a comics original Loki. We got a much more like Berserker style black Loki with a like mechanical hammer. I don't know what the other references are here too. There's a young Loki who has like it looks like almost like a Thundercats style little logo of his horn thing on his chest, and he's sitting there carefully petting what appears to be a little crocodile Loki, a Loki-dial, a Loki gator, Allokiator. I don't know, but I'm so confused and I love it, and I'm very, very excited to see where this goes next. So that was a cool ending to that episode. To an otherwise good episode, but again, the scope feels a little smaller. My predictions. So the smaller ones first. I'm betting that Mobius will get to come back. I hope he gets to come back and will exit the season getting to go back home to his jet ski. Or otherwise gets to like fold back his memories into his normal self or something. As a greater version of this prediction, I'm wondering if all of the pruned are all alive in their own individual spaces. Like, does it warp them to secret time cells or something that they're all contained in? Can they all come back? Can the reset timelines come back, or are they also are they destroyed, or are they in a place where they could be revived? Like, is this stuff that can be reset? Especially with both What If and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness coming out, soonish. Because Doctor Strange is a little further out, but What If is coming in August, so there may be something there. The big prediction. So whoever actually controls the TVA is not actually protecting the timeline. They're less so deciding this is what the timeline's supposed to do, and so we're protecting it from all these dangerous deviations. Instead, they're manipulating it. They're guiding the timeline in a very specific direction, a means to a very specific end that we don't know yet. And they need at least one or both of the Lokis alive. That is my thought for why the Lamentus Nexus event happens, because Lamentus 1 was going to be destroyed. So there would not have been any way possible for them to have impacted the timeline enough to actually create a Nexus event. Unless the two of them like kissing creates some kind of bizarre explosion or time thing or something. Like, otherwise, whoever is controlling the TVA needs one or both of the Lokis alive, and essentially like scribbled onto the timeline, essentially like, hey, deviation, go find them fast kind of deal. I don't know. I think that's what might be happening here. I feel like many of my predictions have been like, I've been pruning a lot of my predictions as they've been being proven false. So that's been a whole thing. This episode's been kind of all over the place for this review. Rather, it's so hot. It's finally cooling down at long last after 3 straight days of extreme heat. So I'm just happy to be done with that. I feel like we're also out of the weeds as far as the rough episodes. I hope the last 2 episodes are on par with, this one in episode 2. I'm giving this episode an 8. I think it did a great job of bringing things back, coming up with some really neat twists, doing some really clever bait and switch, maneuvers to catch us off guard. I think they did a really good job with it. And I had a lot more reactions to this episode, like verbal, reactions than I have for most of these shows so far. So I'm hoping to see more of that for the last 2 episodes, which I'm just going to randomly predict are going to be Into the Loki-verse and Red Line. So we'll see. I have no idea what season 2 will look like at this point. anything could happen by now. It's so confusing, and so much stuff that we've been led to believe was true is not true. Also, Miss Minutes is out there as well, and I kind of wonder if Miss Minutes is like some malevolent being that has been manipulating all of this. But then again, like, she kind of is presented as this AI based hologram, so I don't know. But also, yeah, I had mentioned the metal detector at the beginning. It makes a lot more sense why they'd be concerned about robots showing up and incinerating all of them that are, because they don't want other people to know that the timekeepers are robots, and they don't want people to look into Miss Minutes and all of that. And if they're robotic, they might have a few natural ways of doing that. And the camera has overheated twice now, so I'm not going to turn it back on, but I'm going to say thank you for watching this episode. I would love to hear what you think of this series, as well as the show Loki. We got 2 more to go, so we'll catch you next week for episode 5. See you later.